everyone, it's Clarice, and today I just thought I would talk about my history as a reader, I guess, and just some really important books that kind of stand out and have made a really big impact on me as a reader over the years. I'm not really sure what book made me a reader. I don't think that I ever was not a reader, but the books that I associate the most with my childhood, which you probably know if you've watched any of my tag videos probably, would be the Babysitter's Club books by Anne M. Martin, as well as the Mary-Kate and Ashley Adventures and Two of a Kind books, which are also Mary-Kate and Ashley. Those books were basically my childhood. I had a whole tiny bookshelf just for Babysitter's Club books. I don't think anyone rereads books more than a child. If something was fun, I was gonna do it over and over again. If I loved the TV show Pokemon, I would watch it over and over and over again, even if that meant watching the same episode over and over and over again for a week. And the same went with books. I devoured those books multiple times. After that period of my life, I'm pretty sure I was still into reading, but no books really come to mind. The next significant book I think that made a big impact on my reading came several years later when I was 12 or 13, around that age, when I started reading the Twilight series. I'm not sure how much I would like it if I read it again now, but at the time I was obsessed with this series and I read all the books. Every single one of them probably took me 1 or 2 days to read. Breaking Dawn was the very first book that I pre-ordered, and even though I didn't realize that this is a classification of books already, those are probably the very first young adult books that I ever read. And then the year that I was obsessed with Twilight was also the year that I got my very first solo in the choir, which was Defying Gravity from Wicked. And then at that point, I kind of got obsessed with Wicked, and because of that, I wanted to read a book. But take note, I was 13 years old, and if any of you have read Wicked, you'd probably know that the content is kind of mature. I probably wasn't at the right age to truly understand much of it, and so this book put me in the biggest reading slump ever. This book took me 2 years to read. I read it on and off. It was just too heavy for me and the content just wasn't for my age, and I don't think I really understood what was going on, but I eventually finished it. But in that 2-year period, I don't think I really read much at all. Then suddenly, when we went to the United States for vacation this one time, I bought my very first Kindle, and that definitely got me back into reading. So it was very different books to what I had read before. The Amazon Kindle store has a lot of indie authors and a lot of smaller titles for cheaper prices that are like $1 or less, and I read a lot of those books, and a lot of those books that sounded interesting to me at the time were chick lit books, which you might find weird because at the moment, if you know my taste in reading at all, you'd probably know that I'm not the biggest fan of romance in my books. I'm okay with it, but I'm very picky about it. So it's weird that at one point in time, I read a lot of chick lit, mainly because they were cheaper books on the Kindle and they were fun to read anyway. Soon after that, like many other people, I discovered the Hunger Games and I got hooked. After I read the Hunger Games trilogy, I just went into this crazy dystopian phase. Like, for a couple of years, I read almost exclusively young adult dystopian. I went on to reading a bunch of other dystopian trilogies such as Divergent and Delirium and the Maze Runner trilogy. Though at some point during my dystopian phase, I did read a book that wasn't dystopian. A book that for years I considered to be my favorite book of all time, and that book is The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak. I didn't know what this book was about. It was just a book that I was gifted by my boyfriend, who does not read, but his brother reads, and his brother told him to get me this, which disappointed me at first, but after I finished reading it, I fell in love with this book. And this book is very important to me because it's the first book that I ever considered to be my favorite. Even though now it's no longer alone on that list, it was definitely the first book there. And it will always have a special place in my heart for that. Though I did get sick of dystopian eventually, and then I continued to read some other book. No specific genre really, but I was just reading. Up until this point, starting from the moment that I bought my Kindle, I had had read almost exclusively just ebooks. Main reason being because I'm asthmatic, and for whatever reason I wasn't storing my books particularly well and all of them just got moldy. So I didn't really have a bookshelf. This here is my first real bookshelf. But because my books got moldy, most of the books from my past are not here. All my Baby Sisters Club books, the few Harry Potter and Series of Unfortunate Events books I had, all my Twilight books, all of them are gone. Like 95% of these books I got within the last year or so. Which brings us to the next stage in my reading life, which was when I discovered Booktube. Sana from Books and Quills, and I think that was the first time I discovered that there was such a thing as Booktube and got obsessed. The first book I think that I read because of Booktube is the second book in my life that I ever considered to be an all-time favorite of mine, Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. And in Booktube eventually led me to reading the Throne of Glass series by Sarah J. Maas, which is the first series that really got me into high fantasy. Then I discovered the Mistborn trilogy, which is my favorite series of all time, which really got me into adult high fantasy. And then Booktube made me start reading things like sci-fi, which I never really read before but love now, and then got me into reading graphic novels, which I now have a whole compartment on my shelf for. And now I'm even listening to audiobooks, which I never thought that I would do. Got me really into reading more books, including some books that weren't available in the Kindle store, so I had to buy physical books of them, which I didn't mind at all, and then started to appreciate physical books even more, especially when they were really pretty. And eventually my little tiny sort of bookshelf, but not really a bookshelf, became full, and I bought this beautiful thing. And now while I still read a lot of ebooks, I also read a lot of physical books. And when before I would be happy to read 1 or 2 books a month, now if I read 4 books, then that month wasn't a good reading month, and I'm finding myself reading 7 or 8 books a month, which a year ago I would have considered absolutely ridiculous. And while I've always loved reading, I would now consider myself obsessed. As far as obsessions go, I think reading would be a pretty noble one, so I'm really happy with that. Anyway, that was my reading history in general. What were some books that made a significant impact on your reading? Please leave them in the comments down below. Anyway, please like this video if you liked it, and subscribe if you haven't yet. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye!